Driving the night shift in Seattle is an exercise in endurance. It's not just the hours. It's the relentless, oppressive rain that turns the city into a blurred, neon-lit watercolor. The rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers usually acts like a metronome, lulling me into a state of autopilot. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, coasting on cheap energy drinks and stale podcasts, when my app pinged with a new ride request around 2:30 a.m. The pickup was in a wealthy, quiet suburb, the kind of neighborhood where the houses are set far back from the road, hidden behind tall hedges and wrought iron gates. The passenger's name was Arthur. I pulled my Honda Civic up to the curb, the tires splashing softly in the deep puddles. A tall, impeccably dressed man stepped out from the shadows of a large stone porch. He was wearing a tailored charcoal trench coat and carrying a sleek, black leather briefcase. He didn't rush through the rain. He moved with a calm, deliberate elegance, opening the rear door and sliding into the back seat. He brought with him the scent of expensive sandalwood cologne and a sharp, metallic chill from the night air. "Good evening, David," he said, his voice rich, smooth, and incredibly polite. "I appreciate you coming out this far in such terrible weather." "No problem at all, Arthur," I replied, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He was older, maybe late 40s, with silver hair perfectly combed back. He offered a warm, reassuring smile. "We're heading downtown, right? About a 40-minute drive with this rain." "Take your time, please. There is absolutely no rush," he said, setting his briefcase neatly on the seat beside him. The first 20 minutes of the ride were genuinely pleasant. Arthur was the perfect passenger. He asked polite questions about my night, laughed at my mild complaints about the city traffic, and spoke eloquently about his work in finance. He was charming, disarming, and entirely normal. I felt the tension in my shoulders finally start to relax. As we approached the edge of the city limits, the dense residential streets gave way to a strip of commercial highway, dotted with lonely gas stations and 24-hour drive-thrus glowing harshly against the dark, rainy sky. "David, forgive me for asking," Arthur spoke up, leaning forward slightly so his voice easily carried over the sound of the rain. "But I haven't eaten since noon, and I am absolutely famished. Would you mind terribly if we stopped at that burger place up ahead? I'll gladly buy you whatever you'd like for the inconvenience." It was strictly against the app's policy to make unassigned stops, but a free meal at 3 a.m., offered by a guy wearing a $2,000 coat, was hard to pass up. "Sure, Arthur. That sounds great. Just a black coffee and some fries for me, thanks." I flipped my blinker on and pulled into the glowing, fluorescent canyon of the 24-hour drive-thru. The speaker box crackled, and Arthur leaned closer to the center console, politely ordering a large meal for himself and my coffee and fries. I rolled forward to the payment window. The harsh, white, fluorescent lights from inside the restaurant spilled into the dark cabin of my car. The worker at the window was a young girl, maybe 19, wearing a faded uniform visor. She looked exhausted, leaning heavily against the stainless steel counter as she reached out to take my credit card. "He's paying, actually," I said, gesturing with my thumb to the back seat. The girl nodded and leaned out slightly to look past me, expecting Arthur to hand her cash or a card. The moment her eyes met his in the back seat, she froze completely. It wasn't a subtle reaction. The boredom instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. All the color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth parted slightly, and her hands, which were resting on the window ledge, began to tremble violently. Is everything all right, miss?" Arthur asked from the back seat. His voice was still perfectly smooth and polite, but the warmth was entirely gone. It was flat, cold. The girl didn't say a word. She just stared at him for 3 agonizing seconds, her breath catching in her throat. Then she violently snapped her attention back to me, snatched Arthur's card without looking at him again, and practically sprinted away from the window. "Kids these days," Arthur chuckled softly behind me. "Working the graveyard shift really takes a toll on the nerves, doesn't it?" I laughed nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, I guess so." But my heart was suddenly pounding against my ribs. A minute later, the girl returned. She didn't open the window fully, just enough to shove the heavy paper bag of food and my cardboard coffee cup into my hands. She didn't hand the credit card back to Arthur. She shoved it directly into my palm underneath the bag. As she let go of the food, she dug her nails sharply into the back of my hand. I flinched, looking up at her. She was staring directly into my eyes, pleading silently, tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. Before I could ask what was wrong, she slammed the drive-thru window shut and locked it. "Let's get going, David. The food smells wonderful," Arthur said pleasantly from the dark back seat. I put the car in drive and slowly pulled forward into the dark, rainy parking lot. I placed my coffee in the cup holder and set the greasy paper bag on the passenger seat. Taped to the front of the brown paper bag was a white printed receipt. But it wasn't a list of our food. Written across the back of the receipt in frantic, heavy red Sharpie were 3 sentences. "He was holding a gun to the back of your seat, and a pair of pliers. Don't go to his destination. Drive straight to the police." The bright red ink on the receipt seemed to burn into my retinas. "He was holding a gun to the back of your seat, and a pair of pliers." My mind went entirely blank. A wave of cold, prickling terror washed over my scalp and shot down my spine. The heavy, greasy smell of the fries suddenly made me violently nauseous. I forced my eyes away from the paper, staring out into the rainy darkness through the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. "Is the order correct, David?" Arthur asked from the dark back seat. His voice was right behind my right ear. So close. Too close. "Yeah," I croaked. I cleared my throat, desperately trying to force the terrifying tremor out of my voice. "Yeah, Arthur, everything looks good. They forgot to give me napkins. I'll just, grab yours." I carefully, agonizingly slowly, reached over and crumpled the receipt into a tight ball, shoving it deep into the pocket of my jacket. I grabbed the brown paper bag and blindly handed it backward over my shoulder, keeping my eyes locked firmly on the road ahead. I felt his cold, dry fingers brush against the back of my hand as he took the bag. I completely stopped breathing until he pulled his hand away. "Thank you, David," he said, the polite warmth returning to his tone. "I appreciate the detour." I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot, merging back onto the slick, rain-swept highway. The silence in the cabin, which had felt comfortable just 10 minutes ago, was now suffocating. Every tiny sound was magnified 100 times. The rhythmic thump of the wipers, the crinkle of the paper bag as Arthur unwrapped his burger, the terrifying metallic clink of something heavy shifting against the leather of his briefcase. Pliers. Why would he have a pair of pliers ready in his hand? The implication was so horrific that my stomach violently lurched. He wasn't just planning to rob me, he was planning to take his time. I slowly, cautiously glanced up into the rearview mirror. Because of the angle and the darkness of the cabin, I couldn't see his lap. I could only see his face illuminated by the passing amber glow of the streetlights. He was chewing slowly, staring straight ahead. But his posture had changed. He wasn't sitting back against the seat anymore. He was leaning forward, his body angled directly behind my seat. He was positioned perfectly in my blind spot. I looked down at the GPS glowing on my dashboard. Continue on I-5 south for 18 miles. His destination was an old industrial park near the shipyards, an area that would be completely abandoned at 3 a.m. If I parked the car there, I was a dead man. I had to get to the police station. But the nearest precinct was in the opposite direction, back toward the city center. If I suddenly slammed on the brakes, did a U-turn, or radically changed the route on the GPS, he would know I was onto him. And if he knew I knew, he would pull the trigger immediately. I needed an excuse to deviate from the map, something natural. "Man, this rain is coming down hard," I said, forcing a casual, tired chuckle that sounded painfully fake to my own ears. "The app is showing a massive accident ahead on the I-5, flooded underpass. I'm going to have to take the next exit and cut through the downtown grid to get you to the shipyards. Might add 10 minutes to the trip. Hope that's all right." I held my breath, waiting for the cold steel of a barrel to press against the back of my skull. Arthur took another slow bite of his food. He swallowed. "The downtown grid?" he asked. His voice was soft, dangerously soft. "Yeah, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Just following the detour, Arthur. I flicked my blinker on and took the sharp right curve of the exit ramp, moving away from the isolated highway and toward the towering, illuminated skyscrapers of the city center. I watched his face in the rearview mirror. He didn't look angry. He didn't look panicked. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face, not reaching his cold, dead eyes. "That's very interesting, David," Arthur whispered, dropping his half-eaten burger back into the bag. "Because my phone shows that the I-5 is completely clear." He leaned an inch closer to the back of my headrest. I heard the unmistakable, heavy mechanical click of a handgun's hammer being pulled back. "Pull over." Click. The mechanical sound of the gun's hammer locking into place was louder than the pounding rain, louder than the engine, louder than the blood roaring in my ears. I could feel the cold, hard circle of the steel barrel pressing firmly through the thin fabric of my seat, directly against the base of my spine. "Pull over," Arthur repeated. The fake, polite veneer was completely gone. His voice was a flat, dead hiss. It was the voice of a man who had done this 100 times before. I took a shaky breath, my eyes darting frantically across the rain-slicked downtown street. The towering buildings on either side formed a concrete canyon, lit by the neon signs of closed storefronts and flickering street lamps. There was no one on the sidewalks. The road was completely empty. If I pulled over to the curb now, in the dark, pouring rain, I would never leave this car alive. The image of the pliers on the receipt flashed in my mind. He didn't just want a quick robbery. "Okay," I choked out, my voice trembling. "Okay, Arthur, I'm pulling over. Just let me find a spot under a streetlight." I eased my foot off the gas pedal. The speedometer dropped from 50 to 40 to 30. The engine quieted down. I gripped the steering wheel, turning it slightly to the right, angling the car toward the dark, flooded gutter. "Put it in park and keep your hands where I can see them," Arthur commanded, shifting his weight in the back seat. I heard the faint rustle of his coat. He was getting the other tool ready. The car slowed to 10 miles per hour. We were drifting toward the curb. If I stop, I die. The thought wasn't a panic. It was a cold, absolute certainty. I didn't hit the brake. Instead, I braced my shoulders against the seat, squeezed the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and slammed my right foot down on the accelerator with every ounce of strength I possessed. The Honda Civic's engine shrieked in protest. The front tires spun wildly on the slick, wet asphalt for a fraction of a second before biting down and violently launching the car forward. The sudden, explosive acceleration threw Arthur completely off balance. The barrel of the gun slipped off the back of my seat as he was violently jerked backward into the leather upholstery. He let out a sharp, surprised shout, his briefcase tumbling to the floorboards. "Are you insane?" Arthur roared, recovering his balance and lunging forward. He pressed the gun barrel hard against the side of my headrest mere inches from my ear. "Stop the car right now or I blow your brains out. If you shoot me, the car crashes and we both die." I screamed back, completely losing my mind to the adrenaline. I kept my foot pinned to the floor. The speedometer needle buried itself past 80 miles per hour. The city blocks blurred past the windows in streaks of neon and rain. I knew he was wearing his seatbelt. He was too methodical not to. But a crash at 80 miles per hour on wet roads was a coin toss, and Arthur wasn't a man who left things to chance. He hesitated. That split-second hesitation was all I needed. I wasn't driving aimlessly. I was desperately scanning the dark city streets for a lifeline. Ahead of me, the traffic light at a major intersection turned solid red. I didn't slow down. I laid my hand flat on the horn. A continuous deafening blare and blew straight through the red light. A massive garbage truck crossing the intersection had to slam on its air brakes, hydroplaning and missing my rear bumper by inches. "You're going to get us killed," Arthur yelled. The calm, sophisticated predator completely replaced by a panicked animal. He grabbed my shoulder, his sharp nails digging into my jacket, trying to wrestle the steering wheel away from me. "Get your hands off me." I threw my elbow backward, blindly striking him in the forearm, and then through the heavy sheet of rain, I saw it. 3 blocks down, parked outside a brilliantly lit 24-hour donut shop, was the unmistakable black and white silhouette of a Seattle Police Department cruiser. Its headlights were off, but I could see two officers sitting in the front seats drinking coffee. I didn't hit the brakes. I aimed the hood of my car directly at the rear bumper of the police cruiser. Arthur looked out the windshield and realized exactly what I was doing. "No, turn the wheel, turn it," he screamed, raising the gun. I squeezed my eyes shut, crossed my arms in front of my face, and braced for the impact. I didn't hit the brakes until the absolute last possible second. At 80 miles per hour on slick asphalt, the car didn't stop. It just turned into a 2-ton, uncontrollable missile. I violently cranked the steering wheel to the left just before impact, desperate not to kill the officers sitting inside the cruiser. The Honda fishtailed wildly. The passenger side of my car slammed into the heavy steel rear bumper of the police interceptor with a deafening metallic crunch that shattered every window on the right side of my vehicle. The airbags deployed with an explosive blast of white powder, punching me in the chest and face. The world spun in a chaotic blur of shattering glass, shrieking metal, and the blinding flashes of the streetlights. My car ricocheted off the cruiser, jumped the curb, and slammed head-on into a thick concrete light pole outside the donut shop. The engine instantly died, hissing violently as hot steam poured from the crumpled hood into the freezing rain. For a few seconds, the only sound was the ringing in my ears and the heavy drum of the rain on the roof. I was pinned against the seat by the deflating airbag, gasping for air, my face bleeding from the flying glass. "Police, show your hands! Show your hands right now!" The screaming voices cut through the fog in my brain. Through the spider-webbed windshield, I saw the two officers from the cruiser. They had drawn their service weapons and were advancing on my wrecked car, their flashlights cutting through the rain and steam. I weakly raised my bloody hands, pressing them flat against the glass of the driver's side window. "Back seat!" I choked out, coughing on the chemical powder. "He has a gun in the back seat." The officers didn't hesitate. They flanked the car, shining their blinding lights into the rear cabin. Arthur hadn't been wearing his seatbelt when the crash happened. The violent impact had thrown him forward, slamming him brutally against the metal partition between the front seats. He was slumped on the floorboards, unconscious, his expensive charcoal coat covered in blood from a deep gash on his forehead. Lying on the leather seat, just inches from his limp hand, was a loaded 9mm handgun, and resting on the floorboard next to his shattered briefcase was a heavy, rusted pair of industrial steel pliers. The officers dragged Arthur out of the car, slamming him onto the wet pavement and cuffing him before radioing for an ambulance and backup. Paramedics had to use the jaws of life to pry my driver's door open and pull me out of the wreckage. I sat in the back of an ambulance wrapped in a shock blanket, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the rainy street. A detective approached me holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the crumpled, greasy fast food receipt I had stuffed into my pocket. "The girl at the drive-thru called 911 about 2 minutes before you crashed," the detective said, his voice grim. "She saw him pull the gun out of his coat while you were ordering. She saved your life, son." I looked over at the wrecked shell of my car. "Who is he?" The detective sighed, looking back at Arthur, who was being loaded into an armored police ambulance. "His name isn't Arthur. He's a suspect we've been hunting for 8 months. He uses rideshare apps to find drivers working the graveyard shift. He forces them to drive to abandoned industrial parks." The detective paused, looking down at his notebook. "The pliers, he uses them to remove the victim's teeth and fingernails so the bodies can't be quickly identified." I threw up instantly, the sheer horror of how close I had come to being a nameless body in the shipyards finally breaking my mind. I never drove for Uber again. I moved out of Seattle the following month, completely unable to handle the claustrophobia of the rainy, dark streets. But every year, on the exact date of the crash, I send a large bouquet of flowers and a thank you card to that 24-hour drive-thru. I don't know the girl's name, but I owe her my life. Because without her, I would have just been another missing person in the rain.